I'm just really excited to dive in to this conversation. And of course, the name of the game for today is citizen centric, and the idea of putting our constituents or our citizens first as we consider technology, specifically for this panel. So, as we gathered this crop or this group of just amazing panelists, these folks, we've got an incredible group, thought leaders, discussing emerging technology. So I want to kick off with just a baseline, and I'm going to head to Mark for this one. First question out of the gate. I'd love to understand the scope and scale of your digital portfolio, and then the priorities of digital strategy in your approach, particularly as it's been affected by the global pandemic we're in the midst of. So, Mark, you can kick us off. Take 2 or 3 minutes to just share what you all are thinking about in Connecticut.
Yeah, thanks, Ace, and it's great to be with you. Commissioner Jabal is my boss and sends along his regards. We have 40% of the power in the state of Connecticut out right now, and he's at the head of our response team trying to restore services. So, when Governor Lamont came into office in 2019, one of his first State of the State or budget addresses was really around the need to have more of our services online. And that really set for us in motion what we had been conceiving, but hadn't yet had some broad buy-in to undertake, which was the launching of a Connecticut digital service. So through the last year, we ran an RFP process, created a small team, and actually launched our first product, which is the Connecticut Business One Stop just last week. So that was the foundational goal, but the pandemic created for us a whole new set of challenges that we were able to apply our digital acumen to solve some problems. And so, besides creating the new digital office services, we did quite a bit around paying attention to what our citizens were telling us around the pandemic. So we developed a coronavirus page and redesigned it 3 times, taking into account a lot the user feedback about what they needed to hear, what was changing in our environment. So, first it was around masks and school closings, and then it was business closings, and then reopenings. So, each time that we turned the crank and additional information or became relevant, we used what citizens were asking about on our website, through our chatbot, to reform the kind of information that we were providing for them. And I think that's a great way to understand how we're approaching digitization and digital services in Connecticut, right? Our guiding principles are really to listen to what our users are saying. We spent a lot of our history running our technology through our agency programs, and that does a great job for the program, but it doesn't do a great job for their citizen or our residents or our constituents or our businesses. So we're listening to them through user research, through analytics on the web, but building to really a sense of empathy with our constituents in mind. Our next piece that's really important as a guiding principle to us is to hide the seams between our programs and agencies. Citizens, residents, they don't care which agency they need to interact with. And so our digital presence needs to help make that go away and have them accomplish what they came to do, not just how we're organized. So really disguising our organizational structures with technology as a way of breaking down silos.
Awesome. Mark,
yep.
Oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
Yeah, two other just quick things was, a focus on accessibility, Ace, really using our digital technology to reach all citizens wherever they are, and, moving fast and not being perfect. So being able to make mistakes and fix them along the way, as long as we're listening to our customers. So thank you.
No, thank you. That's, you know, as I'm having a conversation with either technologists or folks who very much appreciate technology, I mean, you just hit on the core tenets of lean methodology, right? You know, move quickly, stay nimble, close the feedback loop or tighten the feedback loop, and then ultimately the customer development process of listening to the folks who are actually using our products. That is textbook, and it is encouraging to hear that that's what's happening in Connecticut. So I want to jump to Michael Newsom in Pennsylvania to share the same. You know, what's your digital portfolio look like? What areas do you touch, or what areas do you control that the folks in Pennsylvania are touching? And then ultimately, where are you heading, and how has the coronavirus affected that?
Oh, great. Thanks, Ace. Yeah, we in the Office of Administration, IT operations are centralized within our office. And over the years, we've consolidated key infrastructure such as data centers and telecom office. And in 2017, we set up a shared services model for staffing, funding, and governance. We continue to monitor the success of this model today, and we've added more focused governance to require additional approvals to ensure consistency and to avoid duplication across the Commonwealth. In 2019, we embarked upon customer service transformation. Now, our governor, Governor Wolf, and I work together, and he has a long-term experience as a builder, as a business owner, and if I must say, a business innovator. Even with his family-owned 6th-generation building products business, he recognized the need to make significant changes to remain competitive and to set new standards within the business. For example, we were the smallest company in our industry that ran SAP ERP system. Now, that said, he wants to transform how we deliver services to the people of Pennsylvania, online, over the phone, and in person. And he called on IT to work with his office to make this happen. Now, if you can add a little bit of context to the work that we're doing with customer service transformation, that would be helpful.
Back in 2018, the governor's office launched an initiative.
You're still frozen a little bit there.
We're low on audio for you. Can you bump that up perhaps?
Okay.
And Michael, we'll pop back to you for a second. As you think about coronavirus specifically, how has that affected the way that you're communicating, interacting digitally with the folks in Pennsylvania?
Well, yeah, in mid-March, I don't remember the date anymore, but the governor mandated telework for telework within the Commonwealth. And we just basically shut down the Commonwealth. And at that time, we learned quite a few things about, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so one of the things that we thought we had, for example, our VPN, and we had certainly had enough capacity, we thought, but as we brought more and more people onto the VPN, we learned that we had some issues there and that we had to upgrade the VPN. So we learned from that, and our IT group was able to operate on the fly. I mean, as things came up, they reacted very quickly. I can't tell you how many hours. I mean, folks have worked long hours to make these things happen. So this pandemic has, not only for PA, but for the entire world, changed the way we do things. And we had to learn very quickly. And telework was the main thing, but then just what we're doing right now with a Zoom meeting, and we use Skype for the most part in the Commonwealth. But we had to learn how to not only deal with each other in this type of setting and over the phone, in many cases not being able to see each other, but also we have trainings that we have to do. We have keeping folks up to date on what's going on throughout the Commonwealth. And we had to do all that remotely. So we've set up things, even on the HR side, they learn how to do virtual trainings and that type of thing. And we'll work closely with IT to make those things happen.
Michael, much appreciated and really helpful context. I think that last piece that you touched on, ultimately the shift and figuring out VPN and having folks plugged in to make that transition to teleworking seamlessly. I think that shapes the next question, and I'm going to pop to Chris for this one. When you think about the long-term implications, not only of the pandemic, although I think that's expediting our learning very rapidly, what are the long-term implications of your digital infrastructure in Washington State, and how are you thinking about the future and perhaps future-proofing as much as we can do in the digital world?
Well, thank you for that question. To exacerbate all the things that are going on, you've already mentioned COVID-19, budget cuts, freezes, and things like that. We're in the middle of doing an ERP now with an $8 billion shortfall and a very skeptical legislature. So building bridges to a long-term strategy is absolutely necessary so that we can connect with our citizens and regain the confidence of our state legislature. So those bridges we've identified are operational, financial, and procurement. We've done a great deal of research into what other states have done and taken away many, many lessons of how they've done their ERP, what should we include, forecasting what's going to be needed into the future. And so at the forefront of our ERP is the investment in AI technology and the natural migration to the cloud. I don't think this is any surprise to anybody. But it's accelerated our use of the initial stages of AI technology, which are things like chatbots, to help speed up what we're doing, especially in our area of employment security. So in the meantime, we are still required to provide other things like employee assistance, employee education, workspaces and education to our schools. So we are still looking at what are the long-term strategies to doing this. We do not think that we're going to be in COVID forever, but we'll probably be in this situation for a fairly long period of time. Who knows at this particular point, at least until we find a vaccine. So we need to find new ways to provide these services, whether they're through SaaS applications, automation, or enhancements to our web portal, allowing better access to contracts. And did I mention that $8 million budget shortfall? So we're trying to do all these things based on market research. We cannot afford to fall further behind in our transformation efforts, as it would be a disservice to the citizens of Washington and the state workforce, which means we will need to work smarter and have clear roadmaps to success. So that's what we're trying to do in the state of Washington. I think our story is well told by our vendors out there.
Great, thank you so much for that, Chris. You touched on so many areas. Out of curiosity, you mentioned you did this scan of other states and how they're handling the ERP process. Anyone stand out? Do you have one that you really liked and took some notes from?
Well, we went to visit the state of Nevada. We liked what the state of Nevada was doing. We went to Michigan. We went to Pennsylvania. We went to North Carolina. We went to Virginia. You can see the list goes on. And we took notes away from all those people who have done their ERPs. We even went to Canada to look at the Canadian solution and what their government was doing. And then we did an exploratory search in Australia to see the digital services that's being provided internationally also. So we took away lessons from all those things. I think once we get done with our ERP, because it's going to take us a while, it'll be very, very modern. I think it's going to transform the way we do government in Washington State.
Great, great. Thank you. So a couple great shout outs there, one of which was Pennsylvania. So I'm going to jump back to John and see if we've got some audio now. John, some thoughts on moving into the future and making sure that your technology can keep up with you. It looks like we got you on mute. All right. So while we're doing that, we'll see if we can get John. John, my promise to you is that we will do everything we can to get some insights from you as we're working through this. But Michael, I'll pop back to you again. That Pennsylvania shout out, I think, timely and appropriate given that we've got you on the horn.
No problem. No problem. I can take that.
Yeah, so moving into the future, and Chris alluded to coming out of the pandemic, which I would imagine all of us expect to do. I'd also imagine there will be some long-term repercussions, and so thinking 4, 5, even 10 years out, how do you see technology shifting, and what are you planning for down the road?
Well, sure. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, in March, at the onset of this pandemic, the first thing that happened to us, the budget office declared a freeze on non-essential hiring. And without giving you all of the woes of Pennsylvania, we also started to, we eliminated some vacancies that we had, and these will be probably permanent eliminations of positions. They basically stopped all procurement activity that was not already in the works, not already approved or committed. So that's where we started. So in June, the budget office and our legislature finally came up and enacted a budget, but it was only a 5-month budget. So we're talking short term now. So that's a 5 months for the fiscal year, which also indicated that we had some cuts that we had to deal with. And for the second portion of this budget, that 7-month back end of the budget, we hope to have more information on what the fiscal outlook will be, and perhaps what additional federal aid will be available to us and other states. This has made it quite challenging for our operations and helping as how we will manage through in the short term.
Right.
But when you want to think about it from a long-term standpoint, we've learned quite a bit. In fact, during this, I had a conversation with the governor, and we talked about some lessons learned during this stay-at-home directive. And one of the lessons was that we've really learned that we can telework from home. From an IT standpoint, I wish John could get in because he and I have had lots of conversation about this. But from an IT standpoint, we're in the process of making a move. And this move involves, let's say, I'll throw some numbers out without giving you all the details, about 1,000 employees. Well, we're learning now through telework that perhaps we don't need a workspace for 1,000 employees. Maybe we could do with a significantly less than that number of employees because of the telework situation. And as a result, we put a work group together to talk about what we called it the post-COVID-19 work group. And let's talk about what our future will look like and the kinds of benefits and efficiencies we can get from what we've learned through this pandemic. And without giving all the details, think about the paper. We haven't generated very much paper at all over this last 5 months. So do we still need a lot of paper? So we're talking about a digital record strategy and putting a policy together to eliminate a great deal of the paper that we're doing. Back to this move that we're talking about, we're looking at hoteling, an opportunity to have spaces that employees will come to. They'll make a reservation, if you will, for that space for a day or two, and then they'll go back to their telework situation. Impact on staffing, impact on parking, and long term, we're going to take a look at all the leases that we have within the Commonwealth to see as they come up for renewal, should we be retaining those spaces? So those are the kinds of things that we're working on that are great things we've learned from the pandemic.
Great.
Secretary John's on.
There we go.
Great,
All
there we go.
So that is perfect on a couple fronts. Michael, I appreciate that piece. And, you referenced the post-COVID working group. I'm going to stay in the COVID realm here for a second, and I'm going to pop to John because we've got audio from John now, your CIO. I've got a question for both John and then Mark. I'm going to pop to you right after for the same question. But John, so many folks, especially those not in the tech world, but wrapping their head around new technology, keep hearing about contact tracing. So I want to hear a little bit about the new tools in the digital realm that you've implemented through your COVID response in Pennsylvania. And then, Michael alluded to some of the things you've learned paperless, we're in this teleworking environment, perhaps putting less strain on the environment. Can you speak to some of the things you've learned from COVID response that will carry us beyond COVID? John,
Absolutely.
audio, awesome, love it, good to hear you.
Here we are, and hello everybody. Thanks for your participation today. In terms of those specific questions, and without giving too much active procurement information away, contact tracing is something that Pennsylvania's been doing for years. We are evolving to some of the new technology that is available on personal phones and on Commonwealth issued phones. I think everybody understands what that means. Proximity of Bluetooth devices, I think everybody gets that piece. And what we are doing from a contact tracing perspective now is relying on citizens to self-report to their public health officials so that appropriate contact tracing activities can proceed from there. We have an existing automated system, and we are looking to expand that to bring on more contact tracers. Currently, we have about 650 tracers, and we're looking to increase that number to about 4,000, all supported through automation. And now correlation of events through that proximity idea. In terms of digitization, and I apologize for not being able to speak to it earlier, similar to what Connecticut is doing in Highmark, Pennsylvania adopted a digital transformation strategy in about 2018. We've been building towards it. In July of 2019, the governor issued what we would consider a groundbreaking executive order called Citizen First. It has 6 design points in it, very similar to what Connecticut is doing: a single destination for online services, common sign-in across multiple channels, a consistent online experience. Again, think of it in terms of, does this look and feel like an official government service? Fewer domains, fewer websites, fewer URLs, continuous service improvement based on integrated customer service satisfaction in applications and mobile apps. So, Ace, I hope I answered your question.
You did.
I think I'm completely caught up.
No, John, that was great. And, there are a couple of themes there, you've got some secret sauce in Pennsylvania as other states do as well. And so being conscientious of what you share and where you share it is, I think, a big piece of this conversation, being able to share some insights. It sounds like we've got a good network, as you just said, hey to Mark. And so I'd imagine there's some notes being passed. And the second piece that I caught was the streamlining of processes, cutting down on the number of URLs that folks have to navigate to, the number of domains that you might have across your portfolio, pieces like that. And as we kicked off, Mark and Chris both alluded to the same. So I want to jump to Mark. Again, the same question: what new tools have you kind of added into pandemic response? And what have you learned from pandemic response that will inform how your portfolio grows or shifts moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. The word cloud a little earlier, I think, highlighted a lot of what overall state learnings were, and specifically in Connecticut, that what people thought was impossible about remote work really wasn't at all, and just required the appropriate amount of leverage to go ahead and change. And so, basically overnight, making people, allowing them to be productive for a variety of different roles that they have in a remote way was largely the biggest impact of the pandemic. And as Michael, was talking about, not just for now, but as it relates to future real estate and how it is that we work together. I will say that, the events of the last couple of days where, we have a large amount of our state without power, right? It's really stretched the ability to now think even somewhat differently about, well, when it's not accessible, how do we continue to bring the productivity that we need and have become used to working remotely? A couple of other uses of technology that have really blossomed for us. social media and then the interaction between government and our constituents using that platform has really taken off. So we have virtual meetings using Zoom, but public meetings where we have interaction with public. Our governor does a daily streamed, update message where it's all virtual, and so not just broadcasting it but having interaction through those channels as well it really picked up quite substantially. Virtual call centers. So we have 1,000 people doing contact tracing across the state, and stood up a virtual call center and virtual telephony to help them do that, so that they're not calling from their home phones, but they're calling from a recognized and trusted number within the state. Before the pandemic had no chatbot use at all in Connecticut, and now we have 3. So, one related to our coronavirus page, which gets a lot of activity, and then 2 relatively newer settings with our Department of Motor Vehicles and our Department of Labor around our unemployment insurance, but really trying to deflect some of the calls that come in and provide a more effective way for the people who want to engage with us in an online fashion, the ability to go ahead and do so. I'd say the last technology that's really took off for us was the single digital identity, right? And so as we launched our Business One Stop, we were looking at, will people want to sign in, or they want that sort of generic anonymous experience. And what we were hearing from the people is that they want the trusted signed in experience, but they don't want to do this over and over to the different websites and web properties that we have in the state. They want that one way for us to know them and bring together, across our different programs, the information that we have in a way that we're not using that data, right? But we're allowing them to use it, to pull it together and really assemble it for themselves and get a greater picture of how all of their different touch points with government. So that was a little surprising to us, that they were really preferred that trusted experience and that logged in experience than just sort of working with us anonymously.
Much appreciated, Mark. While I have you, I want to shift to a thread that I caught from Chris, Michael, and John. As budgets are shifting, hiring freezes, you've got this constricted or more constraints are being introduced, but you're expected to do more. You figure roughly 80% of folks have a smartphone in their hand. Something like 3/4 of folks have either a desktop or a laptop. And you've got this opportunity to engage digitally as you think about implementing single sign-on, as you think about natural language processing and training bots. What's that tension, and how do you find the balance between we have less people to focus on different things that we might have had to restaff or shift the people we have around to get that work done?
Yeah, that's a common refrain, as we talk to our agency commissioners and leaders, who are already under the gun for their programmatic areas, and our response is a simple one, right? That our digital interaction with our citizens is the most efficient way for both us and them, for those that want to participate in that delivery chain, right? Because it's available whenever you want it, whenever it's convenient to you. And the upcoming generation of digital natives just automatically use that as a way of interacting. So the more that we can shift that to the digital realm, the more resources of our limited resources we have to work with people in ways that they need for the people who, because as governments we serve the neediest of our people. So making sure that for those who need in-person interaction or over the phone interaction, that we're putting those resources to in place, but delivering more as much as we can digitally helps us maintain that balance in a way that we absolutely need to.
You've got quite the job, and we appreciate you for it. I want to stay kind of on the topic of balance, but I'm going to jump over to Chris in Washington State. As you balance the citizen-centric approach, how do we get the best pieces of technology into the hands of the people who need to use them? How do you reconcile that or balance it with the internal bureaucracy, perhaps, that slows down adoption of new technology at the state government level? You know, you need new things, you want new things, people want them in their hands, but you might have some inertia to overcome within state government. Thoughts?
Well, I have to say that there's an old axiom that's out there: it's better to be lucky than good. And so we've been very lucky in the fact that we have a technology leasing program in the state of Washington. We've had one for, I want to say, probably about 7 or 8 years now. And so at the downturn of this pandemic, we actually turned to our leasing program and was able to get all the things that we needed to help us modernize our now new mobile workforce. So that was one of the things. Plus, in addition to that, we had memberships in a number of cooperatives besides having a master contract system. So we could access a number of different vendors, and whoever could give us the best service or the best price, or maybe better service at an elevated price that our contracts would allow us to do. So while I would love to say we had all this forethought and planning ahead of time, actually it was built into the contracts that we did. It was part of our system that already existed, and so now we're using it. So a lot of these things too that I'm mentioning about being lucky than good, some of this is actually not luck at all. So let me mention something that I think Mark mentioned about having the neediest. And that's the fiber optic backbone and the 5G networks and that the FCC is really arguing about. And I think all the CIOs can relate to this discussion. And so to serve the neediest people and to serve the rural areas of our state, where actually 1/3 of our entire population lives, is we have to have this fiber optic. It's the backbone of everything that we want to do digitally going into the future, and will bring everyone together into the digital world. Without that, you're still operating, let's literally say, back in the Stone Ages. So what we've done to balance that budget piece that you were talking about, there are 2 areas that we're not taking any money from. One is our procurement staff, because they do the lion's work of doing the research on what we should be buying based on customer needs and customer interviews, and making sure that we're not only serving state agencies, but our poly subs. Our poly subs are important to us because that's 60% of all the services that we provide are to poly subs. And in many cases, it's 70% of all the services that we provide. And we're not cutting back on IT budgeting. And basically the budgeting for IT is in staff. We need to keep those staff members working. We need to make sure that we have the right kind of staff on board. So we've decided to cut in other places besides IT staff and procurement staff. So that's part of our strategy moving forward.
Great. Thanks again for that, Chris. So we're almost at time. We're about to wrap up, but Chris, a couple things you just touched on, namely some of the stats that you just shared. You just shared a fair amount of just data that you have on hand, and it's easy for you to recall, which is incredible. But in some of our prep calls, John actually talked about the way that we communicate with citizens in our respective states. And so I want to talk about data visualization really briefly. And it seems like Pennsylvania is doing some great work there. So I'm going to jump to John and Michael to close us out for the panel in how you're making data and metrics and the things that you're measuring that are incredibly important to your citizens. How are you making that available? How are you making that palatable? And how are you making it pretty so we can see that data visualization? John and Michael, for whoever wants to take that last question.
I'll get started, and thank you, Ace. So a couple of things that we're doing. one of the key elements of our strategy is publicly available information and transparency. And a couple of years ago, we established an open data program. So many of our dashboards and data sets are available at data.pa.gov. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're also taking advantage of virtual assistants in the same way that Connecticut is to integrate with key programs like unemployment compensation. Now, to take it a step further, and this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'll turn it over to Secretary. The idea of what we've gone through in the last 4.5 months, I'm sure many of you can relate with the idea that a press conference, a news event, regardless of what it is, has involved some sort of spatially enabled data representation or visualization. That's IT speak for a map. And almost every press conference, whether it's Governor Wolf or Dr. Levine, our public health official and Secretary of Health, has some sort of map in it. And so spatially enabled data, now is the time, and we see this as a big opportunity to help citizens, business entities, suppliers understand where we are and where we're headed. Secretary?
Well, great. John, you must have been reading my notes because I wanted to talk just something very similar to that. But let me just summarize or give you one point regarding that, because you have IT talk, and I'm going to put it down where the folks can understand it. As we look at data, and the governor did a number of press conferences, our Secretary of Health has done a number of conferences. They've talked about decisions that they've made, and lots of data, lots of information available, but folks don't understand how these decisions are being made. So I'll call it data mining, but taking the data and putting it out there is forcing us to explain the data to the citizens. They understand what we're doing. Sometimes they don't know why we're doing it. And we just have to make sure we take this data, put it in such a format that they're able to understand it. And just one final point, as I went through my career with finance and accounting and numbers, I always prided myself in being able to explain the numbers without using the numbers. And that's really what we need to learn to do with this data. Explain to folks what we're doing, why we're doing it, without inundating them with all of the data. But the data is important. So thanks for that, John.
Michael, thank you for putting that in layman's terms for us. Us IT guys tend to just throw out jargon. So I appreciate you bringing that home. And the rest of the audience seems to as well, especially on that last point, data visualization and telling stories. I saw Sean from Michigan mention you have to tell the story. And I think that sums this up as a session very nicely. So I want to thank Chris, Michael, John, and Mark for joining us and sharing some incredible insights.